Chief Farmer.
I'd like to say good evening to the committee chair, co-chair, council members. In lieu of the recent events that happened in Texas, obviously there have been some concern in our city about Winston-Weaver, which is a fertilizer company located right here in Winston-Salem. So tonight we're going to present that report for you. Just before we get started, we do have Mr. Vernon Carlton, who is actually the operator and president of that. So companies would like for him to stand for us, please.
And he's who again?
Vernon Carlton. He's the president of Winston-Weaver Fertilizer.
All right, Mr. Thank you for coming. And while they're doing that, after the Mr. Dan Dwight wants to speak on item. No, you're on 3 and 4. 4, we have done 4, haven't we? Yes. So, they can still speak. Yes, Chief Farmer.
Okay, basically again tonight we're doing an overview of Winston-Weaver Fertilizer Company, which is located here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I will refer to Winston-Weaver as Weaver Fertilizer throughout my presentation. And of course, this business is located at 4440 North Cherry Street. It was a fertilizer organizational business that was constructed and started here in 1939. Of course, the business has been in business ever since 1929, and here in Winston-Salem since '39. And basically, they're a manufacturer of fertilizer. Their property resides on a little over 8 acres. There are about 65,000 square feet of building space, and the structure itself is a wood frame type structure. And of course, as we said earlier, Mr. Vernon Carlton is the president of the organization. This business basically, again, they mix fertilizer in different blends for agriculture use throughout our city and the community, and anybody, of course, that purchases this product. Again, we want to emphasize that this ammonium nitrate that everybody's hearing about is basically fertilizer. It's typically friendly. People transport it in their cars, their pickups, and it's used basically for putting on your lawns, for fertilizing soil for typical agricultural uses. This company also packages ice milk at the plant also, and they distribute this product to retailers and, of course, citizens within our community. They have office space. They have a loading dock where they unload and unload the product that they blend. They basically have packaging areas. They finish the product, and of course, they put it in bags and store it, and then they ship it out to retailers and businesses throughout this region. Of course, here you see a aerial photo of the plant itself, and if you notice, the large building is where the manufacturing process goes on. Then they have a storage building there, and then there are several other support buildings. And I also note that this organization actually has an on-duty security person that actually stays in a building or the house at all times. And again, just another aerial photo. And of course, most of the businesses in and around Weaver are actually commercial. Several Winston Packaging, there's a Tar Heel Glass, just a number of several business complexes in and around this North Cherry Street area. There is residential to the north, to the northwest, and those areas are as little as 1/10 of a mile away. Also, you have Brownsboro Road, which is also located about 1 mile away, and there are apartments all down Brownsboro Road. But most of the buildings around Weaver itself are actual commercial businesses. One specific question that was asked was about our annual fire inspection. Of course, you can see that inspection was conducted on the 15th of this month, March, ironically, just a month or so ago, and all the violations that occurred there, which were minor violations, as you can see, were corrected. And that is the typical practice that we have when we go to Weaver Fertilizer. They're always compliant, and they do a good job of maintaining the fire protection that they have in place there. There is a note that there are approximately over 4,000 bags of ammonium nitrate or fertilizer stored at this facility in the soda house, which you just saw on the last couple of slides. And of course, that is allowed by the code. And they also have safety data sheets located there in case there's an inspection or someone that needs to know any detail about the products stored there. They have satisfied the tier reporting. There was a report of the chemicals that are listed at that company this year in 2013, so they are up to speed in terms of their tier reporting. Emergency management is aware of those chemicals, and of course fire is also aware of them. The storage is proper, and the processes there are in place, and they are indeed safe. The business is in good standing in terms of the inspections and what we see as necessary to maintain a safe environment for our community as well as for the employees and the firefighters that have to respond during the case we have an event. Ironically, there's concern in the nation about these type of businesses also. So Mr. Carlton has informed us that OSHA is actually doing an inspection or has conducted an inspection at this plant as we speak, and they are still waiting on the report. We do know that in the past, in 2009, there was a OSHA inspection done, and there were all violations were corrected then. This company has also been proactive. They've hired an inspector in the past to basically come to the plant and take a look at the processes, the buildings, et cetera, to give Weaver any input that would be good for them to use as information for implementing changes or improvements in their safety. And so that is a very proactive move. We've even done that in terms of our fire department services. Their air quality permit is in compliance in terms of a local or county requirement, and they're in good standing there. And of course, they do have tanks on this site. They store a fuel which they use for their vehicles, and they also have gas which they use for their vehicles and other operations. Those tanks, et cetera, are in compliance in terms of DENR and any other state regulations. A typical response that we would have there, and we would expect that would be a fire response. This is, again, as we noted earlier, so a wood building, and they do have product stored, loose product in the manufacturing area, and of course bag products. And the key for them is to have that stuff stored properly, keep it dry, have the distances and separations, and they do that very well at Weaver. So what we would expect in most instances would be some kind of fire. If we had an event there, you would have fire, police, potentially a hazardous materials team if we thought there was some issue with the product itself. Emergency management would respond to help us gather additional resources. Of course, we would have the EMS on the spot, any cleanup agencies that might be called to help with mitigation of a spill of any sort. Of course, any regulatory agencies that might be asked to come in the event that we had an incident that generated their need, and of course, utilities, gas, electrical, et cetera, that might be needed in lieu of the fire itself. And those are fairly typical and routine. This slide showed up sort of small, but what we're trying to show there basically is when we respond as a fire department, the blue images are our fire trucks, and basically that's how they would stage as they would come into this business and start trying to determine what type of incident we have and where they would stage the vehicles. Of course, that staging, if we had an incident, would or could typically require us to block Cherry Street, and so again, police would help us take care of that. Our key strategies would, upon arrival, again, determine what kind of incident has occurred, what has happened, what's going on as we arrive, and of course, what we would have to do to mitigate that incident. Again, what we would expect would be a fire, and so we want to let you know, in reality, this is ammonium nitrate, so we will also be concerned about fire as as that particular product might be involved. It's an oxidizer, so heat can basically make it oxidize, and that oxidizing itself could generate even more potential for the product to be more intense in fire. So our goal would be to get there early, and of course to mitigate or stop the progress of any fire early, so we can conserve any product and stop the progress of the fire itself. In general, we would establish hot, cold, and warm zones, which simply mean in the immediate area of the fire, we have people can go here. In the general area, outside of that area, emergency people. And in a warm zone, again, those are places where we will make sure only rescue people or needed people would be allowed to go until we have basically resolved the incident there. If there was a need for decontamination, if there was some exposure, typically you would expect a mild exposure because this product in itself can be an irritant. Indeed, if it people came in contact with it without proper clothing on, but most likely those people would have evacuated because, again, Winston-Weaver has an emergency plan there and those people know what to do there. Of course, if we indeed had an incident, we would also be looking at evacuation in terms of our city, community, the businesses around that. And we would implement that through the general communications that we do from a command post, or we would initiate the city's information process to let everyone know, utilize reverse 911, and also police would also help us if indeed we had to do any evacuation of the immediate people and or businesses around there. And mind you, that could be evacuation could simply mean evacuate and stay in place. Might not necessarily mean we have to move people out. Just depends on what's burning, where the smoke is going, how the smoke is dissipating, whether it's going up and away, or whether it's banking down, weather and all types of a few other conditions might affect that. Again, we want to protect exposures, any businesses around the business itself. We want to confine any hazards, monitor water runoff, and of course, as we noted earlier, this is an oxidizer, so if we indeed had a fire, our initial objective would be to, in a safe way, use copious amounts of water to flood that fire. Hopefully we would get there in a place in an early warning situation where we will have very little fire. Again, to note, Winston-Weaver has an emergency action plan. It's well developed. They train their people. Their employees are aware of that program. Their occupancy is safe, and their prevention criteria is in place. And again, some of that key prevention is keep vehicles away from the product. Keep any leaking vehicles away. Other substances that might impact it, like other fuel oils or other chemicals that might present themselves or be brought into the plant, will certainly be stored. And of course, different kinds of fertilizers are also separated from various other types too. And of course, Mr. Carlton is here, could tell you anything about that you might want to know. And of course, that ends this presentation. I don't know if you have any questions.
Wait, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chief. Years ago, we had a fire out on Chatham Road.
Mm-hmm.
It was a company totally dissimilar to Weaver. They were operating, I believe, under the radar, and we didn't know what was there, and it was just a whole litany of issues. But during that, after the event, there was, I thought, confusion, and I know on my neighborhood's perspective, because there was, I think, Diener maybe coming in, EPA coming in, local. I mean, is there, and God forbid that something would happen, but do we have interlocal agreements or interdepartmental agreements that we know that there's a go-to person and that go-to person is going to function at the same level of community notification as you would?
Yes, ma'am. I remember the incident you were talking about. Certainly, at that incident, EPA had to come in and various other regulatory agencies. And that is not an immediate process. It's usually a contact them, and they send representatives in. So those things are sort of prearranged, but they're still driven by the call at the event. But we do, those agencies do come in. The air quality is an aspect of that. The OSHA checks, again, help align it so that we understand that. And of course, in our process of preparation, in working with emergency management, we know those kinds of agencies would be needed if we had an event that required it. And so they are certainly prepared to call those kind of agencies.
Because I do remember in that case, we didn't know what was in the building. So we treated it inappropriately, and it caused the fish kill off Peters Creek, and it was just, but at any rate, if you're confident that there is an agreement in place and that the desire would be to notify that community as if they were part of that community, and you would be the advocate, you and your men and the city manager.
Yes, ma'am. Once we find out, once that incident grows to a place of community need to know, we'll be contacting Mr. Turner's office, and then you will be informed of that. We'll be using reverse 911 to contact people in terms of an evacuation program, so we're prepared to do that.
Councilwoman Merchell, I've been meeting with the chief of fire, police, and emergency management, and my question always to them, are we ready? Are we doing what we supposed to do? And I said to the city manager also, are we a safe city when anything happens? We know, and the question you asked him simply, are there things in place?
Yes, ma'am.
So people won't become confused and make things complicated. So we're in place. That's what you tell us today.
Yes, ma'am. We're in place. We're very proactive, and prevention is really the key. We don't want Weaver's business to catch on fire, nor do they. So prevention is in place, and certainly we are prepared in terms of how to deal with an incident in case it actually goes to a place of having a fire or a hazard. Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to ask the president of the company, you come up and give your name, hear your name and your address so I can ask you a question, please.
My name is Vernon Carlton. I've actually been there 48 and a half
Address,
years.
please. Give your address and then tell us what you want us to hear.
Address 4440 North Cherry Street.
All right.
I've been there 48 years and 6 months. Bought it in 1993. Me and one person bought it. He's a solid partner.
All right.
And the fire department, they come by and inspect us periodically. We encourage them to do it. We've had an excellent relationship with them, and we want them to keep on coming by and inspecting. And anything they find that we need to fix, we fix it immediately.
So we thank you for being a business person. I'm going to ask my question. We would hope that nothing would happen like that happened in Texas. Would your company be ready to carry out what you were supposed to carry out if you had anything like that to take place?
We are ready. The only thing that we have at that plant that you could call possibly dangerous, and I'm here to tell you the press has done a bad job of on ammonium nitrate, because it is really a safe product, and especially used all over the world, but mainly in the Southeast. It's a safe product. You've got to have somebody that wants to blow it up, to do something to it, to force it to blow up. It's much safer than a gallon of gasoline. You could drop 1,000 pounds out of an airplane, and when it hit the ground, all it would do is bust the bags. But the press has done I mean, it can blow up. And there is a bill trying to get through Congress, that if it ever gets through Congress, which it will not get through this year, but if it ever gets through Congress, it may be so restricted that we might just quit handling it. Everything else that we have at that plant is a fire retardant, more or less. It won't burn. You can't burn fertilizer. If you just simply can't burn fertilizer. These things that you see in California when they're dropping it out of an airplane to try to put the forest fires out, that's a fertilizer raw material that they're using. The only thing we handle is a potential small chance that anything could ever happen is that ammonium nitrate.
All right. Any questions of Mr. Carlton? Yes. Councilman Bessie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carlton, I was just looking at the aerial of your plant. You're located right on the rail line.
We have a rail. We get a lot of things in by rail.
Is that how you get your ammonium nitrate in, or do you
Get it in by rail.
Final product? Is that mostly rail shipped out, or?
We ship out by trucks. We do get inspected by the federal government every year, because of the rails, getting ammonium nitrate in by rail.
Thank you.
Yeah, I used to work for Dina in another area. How often do they visit you?
Fortunately, they never have.
Oh,
Dina, they don't come by our plant. Welcome to, but they don't come by. I don't ever remember coming by.
Then they were talking about fines. Have you been fined by the state for anything?
Never
up
have.
here?
Well, now, OSHA, we've been fined by OSHA. Like I said, I've been there 48 and a half years, so we've had some minor fines. It's pretty hard. We've had one inspection by OSHA that they didn't find anything, and that's pretty rare. They can find anything they want, anytime they want something. And so they do fine you. We've been fined just a few $1,000s. It's been so long ago, I forgot how much. And they had just recently inspected us. They were supposed to come out today and give us the report, but then they called and said they couldn't come till later in the week. So I don't know what they found this time.
All right, well, we know that you want to ask me?
No, I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, but thank you. You may go.
Mr. Carlton, this isn't directed to you, but I just want to thank you for being willing to come to the committee and speak. But Mayor Pro Tem, Chairwoman,
Have you finished with Mr.?
I am, Mr.
You
Carlton.
may sit down.
Okay, thank y'all.
No one else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in order to thank Chief Farmer for the presentation, but also recognize Mr. Milton Sadler, who is our representative on the Emergency Management Department. I happen to have missed the last emergency management meeting due to the centennial events, but I assure you, as our representative on that committee, that Mr. Sadler makes sure that we are prepared and ready to go for this city, but I did want to recognize him as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, ma'am, just had another question for either Chief Farmer or Mr. Sadler at an appropriate point.
Ask it, and we'll see which one's going to answer.
I was wondering, actually a combined question, in the West Texas incident, whether there was an impact at neighboring facilities as a result of the explosion and fire. Did you have any synergistic effects, fire or explosion at other nearby facilities?
No, sir. I think it's very early in that investigation still to try to comment on what actually happened there or what was involved. Earlier today, I took a look at what had been determined by the investigations, and they're basically still saying they don't know why the product exploded. They know what else is there, but they really don't know, and there's no indication that there's any outside impact. Everything is sort of still confined to the actual plant itself.
Okay, without going into the cause, just the fire was constrained to on site.
Yes, sir.
And so this would be the second part of that question. Do we know whether there are any facilities in the vicinity of the Weaver plant that might be impacted by an explosion or fire on the Weaver site? And if so, have we taken that into account in evacuation and response planning?
Yes, sir. I know there, like I said earlier, Winston Packaging is there. There are several business complexes in and around that general area. So certainly, if indeed we would have an incident where we would need to evacuate, we would be ready to do that. We don't think that there are any processes in the plants that are local or in that area that would have an after effect because of something that happened at Weaver. And we can still follow up even more to make sure of that, but we're fairly confident in that right now.
If I may, Madam Chair, that was just a straight up inquiry because clearly we need fertilizer manufacturing facilities. And the only question that I would have is essentially the one I just asked, is it located in a problematic spot? And that would be the kind of information that I would be interested in. And so as far as I've heard today, there's nothing about this spot that makes it unusually problematic.
Yes. And we're ongoing with this as the country finds out more. We're waiting to see what happened too. So if we need to have more proactive actions, we would definitely be informing you and letting you know what those are.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I do Mr. Settle, I meet with him too, and I always ask the question, are we ready? In fact, I've asked Mr. Settle to give us some type of report, just in case there is an emergency, and I believe Mr. Page has that plan. He's already, do we have the plan yet? We have a plan, but one thing that, question about, if something were to happen right today, at one time, you know, we had that workshop where we talked to the people from Raleigh, we went through the workshop, and we have something in place. Who you contact first, the city manager, and how it goes around. That plan is still in place. I think what we need to do, Mr. City Manager, review us again. Review us again. Because as I've said to all of us, we don't know how we're going to act if something terrible happens. And every now and then when I saw the Weaver, I felt that this needs to come before us so the city can see what the fire department's doing, then how the police plays its part. Emergency management is over all of it. Mr. Settle is the one who stepped forward, and it's his office. It's just that you may not want to hear it. I don't think he has enough for budget in his office. I've said that to the city manager. His budget needs to be a little different for something as important as the safety for people.
And if I may, Council Member, Council Chair, I know Ms. Adams was concerned about the immediate area, the community that's close by. And again, we do know that there are residents within a 1/10 of a mile on out, but certainly if any event occurred, they will be very proactive in letting those residential people know what they would need to do and informing them also. And I might also want to add that I have staff here tonight, Chief Robert Owens and Chief Freddie Broom. I didn't do this report by myself. These gentlemen were instrumental in helping me prepare that, so I also want to recognize them also and thank them.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Carlton, for coming out.